Good morning. It's a bit early, but we try to do something good now. I won't present myself again that much. I'm just a consultant from SpringSource, and that's pretty much all, in fact. So, why am I going to talk about Reactive Grails? Well, nowadays, for the current use of the web frameworks I've seen, we have, well, everyone can see we have a lot of frameworks talking about real-time web, where real-time has a new definition, in fact, because it's not really real-time. But applied to the web, real-time means a new set of use, for instance, chatting, video conferences, collaborative applications, and such. So, how can we do that with Grails without, without most of the complexities underlying, in fact, because doing such application can be very, very boring if you start looking at the frameworks around that. If you start looking at, for instance, well, in Grails we don't have a lot of choices to do that kind of thing, but well, if you start looking at how you do that from the very scratch, for instance, if you start doing JavaScript application and doing WebSockets in plain Tomcat 7, for instance, it can be very difficult. And what I've tried to do with a couple of plugins I'm going to introduce, I've tried to lower the complexity of doing this kind of stuff and doing asynchronous work in Grails, and I think it paves the road of Grails 3, and we try to in Grails 3 we'll try to ditch the web part from the core and include the event part in the core, pretty much like Vertex. And in fact, as Graham outlined yesterday, maybe Grails 3 will be able to work on Vertex as an event bus engine. So, I see a couple of use cases for events in the single JVM at least. We can use events, for instance, to loosely couple your application. So if you don't want to directly call a method on your service and prefer to call a callback using, for instance, event on made registration, you don't have to call the plugin directly to call the made registration. It's done for you because the made registration is registered on this event topic. So basically, if someday you need to replace that plugin with another one, you can just drop in a new plugin and nothing changes. If the plugin listens for the same address, that's cool. So you're loosely coupled. It's pretty neat for testing because you don't really know, you don't need to address the code directly. So if you need to mock the handler, you just need to register a mock listener, and that's it. You don't need to do a very complicated. Well, it's not complicated. I'm bitching there. You don't need to do meta object programming to replace the method code, etc. The mock is just about replacing the listener in that case. Also, events and such architecture can be used to do declarative logic. If you look at enterprise integration frameworks such as Camel or Spring Integration, they allow you to do the business logic, in fact, in a declarative way, either in XML or in the builder, as I've showed yesterday. But in other case, you don't do the conditional part, the looping part, the transforming part in your code. You just plug components, you declare components, and you declare the way they talk each other, and that's it. You don't have to do that in your code. So it's normally easier to maintain. It's normally easier to talk with business users because you can just exchange the schema generated for an XML, for instance, and say, okay, that is my logic, it's in that XML. So is it good? Is it what you want? It's better to talk with business user with a schema than a code. And also, events in memory can be used for scalability. Well, if events are used asynchronously, you can just throw a few events in parallel. And for instance, if you need to do massive insert in GORM, you can just launch 3-4 times a same event which does the insert, and that it will be executed in parallel. So that can be interesting for in-memory use case, but also for cloud use cases, because if you need to deploy multiple instances of a Grace application, like in real-life production application, you don't deploy a single Grace application. You need to deploy a cluster, at least for high availability. If one fails, you need another one to take the load. Well, in that case, you want to reuse the resources you have deployed. So events allow you to do that. How so? In fact, if the event system is able to communicate to the other machine, you don't need to know which machine is going to reply for this event, or you can even send an event and every machine will reply or do something. That can be interesting. For instance, when you need to synchronize your cache or your search index, they are going to be the same on every machine for performance reasons. But whenever someone needs to submit or save on a machine, the cache and the index, the search index, needs to be the same on every machine, not only the machine which has been used to save a new object. So in that case, you can send an event, or you can listen for a save event and just synchronize in every machine. And also, I tend to do that a lot with SpringSource customers. In fact, more and more, we tend to see architectures where everything is decoupled, but each component of the architecture don't communicate through a protocol like REST or something like that. The customers don't use REST anymore to communicate between components. They use message brokers and messaging, and the event plugin try to build on top of that, and that can be very useful in such architecture. So, an event bus is just a pipeline where you can just send events and probably register at some point. The listeners are components able to register to this pipeline. You have two kinds of publishing. You have the point-to-point, which is basically one sender and only one receiver, and you have the publish-subscribe, which is basically the one-to-N paradigm, including you, which means you will need to take that in account if you use event, because if you think that sending an event will only be applied to the other machines or other clients, you're wrong, because yourself will be part of the event publishing, because you're on the publish-subscribe pattern with the event plugin for the moment. So the interesting part is whenever your application is architectured around that kind of patterns, using an event bus to decouple everything, at some point you can replace the event bus and the listeners and use the same architecture to deploy your application in the cloud, because finally, if your event bus is a message broker, well, you cut the boundaries between application. You send an event to an external server, which will be dispatched to the other application. So it's not anymore. It's not an in-memory use case anymore. It's quite easy to migrate from an event architecture to well, a cloud application, at least. So I I'm sure you were bored until now. It was the theory part. So carry on the next, the plugin presentation. Currently in Grace, we have a few plugins, as far as I know, that allow you to do Grace event-driven application. We have Spring events. Unfortunately, if I'm correct, Robert Fletcher is going to deprecate that one. And also it uses the Spring core application context events, which are quite limited, in fact. The routing plugin is the most interesting, I think, because it uses Apache Camel. And even as a SpringSource consultant, I'm a huge fan of Apache Camel. It's very, very well done, very quite complete in terms of ecosystem. You have a lot of components. You can send your event through Twitter. Well, we can do that in Spring integration now. That wasn't a good example, but you have so much component. You can even transform a message to send your event in IRC. Which does that? Who does that? I don't know, but it's super cool. Well, the problem is the plugin is not as super crazy in terms of integration and convention. I don't find it very well integrated. The framework in itself is super cool, but I would expect more as something integrated in Grace. There is Falcon utils. I can't talk a lot about that because I'm not sure if it's maintained anymore. I've only seen a couple of documentation. I never used that myself. But worth mentioning it. And we have Platform Core. The plugin Mark Palmer and I have released, at least in a release candidate last year. So Platform Core is not only about events. In fact, it's about, well, it's about a lot of stuff. But doing that simple, it's about providing API to create a plugin ecosystem. So basically, Platform Core is something to build other plugin on top of it, or to allow application, to allow application not to do a lot of things. It's basically a base for plugin development. So this plugin has been released for the first time last year, and the big purpose of that plugin, if it's a base for all the plugins, its big purpose is being a API-driven design, because in fact the plugin holds a lot of abstraction, and the sub-plugins, depending on it, implement their own way to do this kind of stuff. Plus some utils included in that plugin. For instance, the plugin allows you to do configuration work, allowing you to give configuration key by convention and scanning which keys a plugin is giving to the application. You know that whenever you install a plugin, you have a new set of configuration keys, and sometimes it's a bit of a mess to look for them. So configuration API is about that. Navigation is about doing a conventional sitemap. Injection is quite interesting, and we need to work on that. It's a DSL to inject methods and method, in fact, and you can inject method in artifact. For instance, I use that to inject an event and own method on every services, domain, and controllers. It's just a matter of declaring in a DSL, I want on the following artifact, the following closure injected, the following method injected. And this is quite neat because we have built around that a debug mode to know which kind of method is injected in your artifact, because sometimes it's hard to know which method are available to your controller due to the dynamic nature of Groovy. And we try to work around that by having a convention and tracing everything injected in your artifact. There is a security abstraction. There is the event abstraction, the one I'm going to talk there. So taking the bus to The events in Platform Core allow you to do a couple of things. So you can expect it to allow you to listen for plugin or application events. Also, we have namespacing support, which is basically interesting if two plugins provide the same listeners, the same topic. For instance, you have two security plugins, Gyro and Spring Security, and they both provide user registration event. But since the two are overlapping, how do you differentiate them? That's why we have namespacing support. In that case, the Gyro plugin will register a topic event only on the Gyro namespace, and same for the Spring Security one. So this will be bound to the Spring Security namespace to avoid conflict. In fact, it's a bit similar to what we provide in Grace 2.2 namespace support, or Grace 2.1. Can't remember. No, it's Grace 2.1. The plugin by default provides you everything to do in-memory eventing, so it doesn't allow you to do cross-GVM eventing. You will need a set of sub-plugins for that. And by default, every calls are asynchronous, so you can use that as an asynchronous processor. There is a background process plugin, for instance. You can use that as a replacement, as a drop-in replacement. And because it's all API driven, and we have built a set of plugins on top of that, if at some point you need more flexibility, you can just install a top plugin on top of that, and we see the free plugin after that. So to install it, just a matter of adding that in your code. Currently we are on RC5. And in code, this is how it looks like. So this is a controller. The injection mechanism injects the event method in your controller. You can also use the on method to register inline listeners, and you can also use count listeners to count how many listeners are listening on that address. So this one is a non-blocking call to the main registration address. The first argument will be an address, a topic address. Since you don't specify namespace, which in Grace Platform Core is a matter of adding a schema like a HTTP protocol, you will add Spring Security : / mail registration if you want to target a specific plugin. Moving on, the second part, which is the data. When you send an event is composed of a message body, which will be the user in that case, and some headers to, for instance, inform the application they're sending an event at that time. This event comes from that class and things like that. You can access the headers to do some neat stuff after. So this is quite simple. Don't forget that whenever you call event, you're not blocked. So everything you do after is going to happen. In fact, if you want to block, you have the following helper. In fact, the event return an event reply object, and the event reply has a couple of API to allow you to block, to get the result of the event, because you can send back replies with the event framework. You can also use the map args form to call the event, which I prefer, in fact, to be like render in Grace controllers. I prefer that because it's obvious what you are doing. You are sending the data user, you are sending on topic mail registration, and if I needed namespace, I could have added namespace, or the short form, which is for. I could have done for Spring Security, for instance. Since it's asynchronous, it's run on a parallel thread, on a separate thread pool. You can customize the thread pool if you want to. It's a Spring Bean, so if you need to increase the number of threads, you can do that overriding the Spring definition. But if you don't need to fork at all, you have parameter called fork false. It's not the default, but sometimes you need to run on the same flow. Well, it's not very well advised on HTTP requests, since we are on the controller. We want to avoid that, so it's not the default, but sometimes it's quite useful. So I left that argument there. Listening for events. Well, we have seen just before we send events to mail registration. So to listen to mail registration, we just have to import the annotation listener, and by default, it will take the method name as a topic name it will listen for. So everything is done to have quite sensible default choices. If you don't want that as topic name, you can use the explicit argument topic, and for instance, my registration too will listen for the same topic. So what happens in that case is whenever I use the same event method I used in the slide before, the two methods will be executed asynchronously. So because I listen for the same address. So this is interesting because in that case we don't want to do the send mail operation in the same thread on the HTTP thread. We don't want to block the user because the current application is sending a mail. No one does that, or you shouldn't do that. So we do that in asynchronously, and well, maybe tomorrow we will add some other stuff like sending a tweet when someone is registering to your application, just to do some buzz around your nice web service. So this is quite open, and that's why. And you could have used the background process plugin, but in that case, the application is quite flexible if at some point you need to add some other callbacks. So another thing you can notice is the signature is explicitly set, because if you don't set the signature, or if you use object a def user, for instance, you will catch every event's types. For instance, if I will have sent a number, for instance, a long, well, this event listener wouldn't have been called because it listened for the specific type data user. And well, you could have done a generic tip like just using user, but this is quite useful and quite important to know. You filter automatically, you filter your events if you type your application listener. Also, if you use a specific type event message from the plugin, you won't receive, you will receive the full object. In fact, the event message as headers, it has also the current topic which it has been sent on, the current data eventually, if any. So this is the envelope around your message body. If you need to do some introspection on the event, you can just use that type, and automatically the plugin will detect that and will not send the current data, but it will send an event message with the current data inside. So, sorry, just forgot a part. Well, not there. Sorry. So we have a listener, we have a way to send events, and the plugin also adds DSL, an artifact finishing with events. So you place that in your config, like filters and bootstrap and URL mapping. And this is a DSL to change the behavior of sending events. So for instance, I want every event sending through GORM namespace, so every event coming from GORM, because the plugin bridges with GORM events as well. So from your plugin by default, from your application by default, you can listen for on delete, on save, on after delete, after after insert, sorry, after update, and such. And if you don't want that, if you want to cancel that behavior, you can just use that notation, and it will prevent to publish every GOM event. If you want to filter an event on a specific topic, if every event sent on test topic need to be a number greater than 2, well, there is a filter and there is a closure argument. You can also directly filter on a specific type. You can also use the context, since the DSL is built with some binding variables. For instance, context, which is the main context, the Spring context. So you can call context some service and directly use any method from your service as a closure with the knit operation. And well, another good point about that DSL is some plugin built on top of platform core use that to extend the behavior of events. For instance, events push allows you to listen for events from browser if you specify that event as browser true. We'll see that a bit later. And if you need to listen for specific handling on error, or if you want to add a global callback, you can add that there with the on reply. You have a timeout, since it's asynchronous, you may want to cancel some long-running operation. You can also say that by default the topic won't be forked, but I won't detail that too much because it's not a good way to use the events. So, well, I've just said you can use the GOM events directly in the with the annotation. If you annotate a method and use after insert as a topic and namespace GOM, you will receive any GOM events for that specific topic. You can reply, so if your listener return a value, automatically it will be sent back to the caller, and the caller can just block doing a get on the reply and receive any values sent by other listeners. So you can do bidirectional communication as well. Well, and there is an on error handler if you need to listen for exception. Woohoo, c'est simple. So, talking about the ecosystem around that. Currently, I'm working on 3 plugins. So there is Events SI, Event Spring Integration, Events Push, and Vertex, which are built on top of Platform Core. Events SI replace the in-memory mechanism coming with Platform Core. In fact, every listeners are stored in a global hash map, and when I need to send an event, I look every listeners in that hash map and I send to the right listeners. So this is quite simple. If you need to replace that mechanism by the Spring Integration one, well, just add Spring Integration plugin, and that's it. You don't have to do anything else. Every listener will now generate a channel and endpoint, which is the vocabulary used by Spring Integration to represent an endpoint, a listener, and a topic. Also, whenever you will use the event method, it won't use the default mechanism. It will just send the event through Spring Integration. So that's super cool. But what is the point about replacing the engine by another engine if in appearance doesn't change anything? Well, Spring Integration can be used to do complex workflow. This is the sample one from the documentation. For instance, this is a cafe ordering. We order coffee, and there is some processing. We split the orders. We do some routing there. Well, very complex flow. Just imagine that for any kind of big processing application. This is a schema generated by Spring Toolsuite, by the way, because Spring Toolsuite is able to read Spring integration configuration and transform that in that. I didn't draw that, or they didn't draw that in the documentation. Well, also the Spring integration plugin adds the DSL we have seen quickly yesterday, and looking at the code, in the event DSL you can also now use the Spring integration DSL I showed yesterday. I won't stay a lot on that, it's not the purpose, but for instance, just after you have installed Spring integration, so using runtime and the plugin name and the latest version, which is M5 in fact, just after doing that, the only thing you have to do if you want to transform your application to publish events on something else than in-memory events, well, you can use the Spring integration to replace any generated channel. If you have declared @listener after insert namespace GORM, you can, because it generates a Spring bin, you can replace the definition, and there I'm replacing the definition by the Spring integration MQP support, and whenever something is going to be sent on that event, on that listener, it will be sent through RabbitMQ. So, like just instantly in 4 lines of code, your application can be deployed on the cloud because they can communicate each other. They will communicate with a RabbitMQ instance by default. It's listening for localhost, but you can change that if you want to. So that's pretty neat. If you need to share events between applications, it's quite simple to change. Well, the other interesting one, which in fact has the most interest in my GitHub account, I get a few pull requests on that plugin, it's the event push, which, well, if you want to provide events, the same event system to your JavaScript, and the more we're going forward, the more we have rich UI with AngularJS and such. Well, in that case, you can use one of the Java and JavaScript framework there, Atmosphere. And Events Push integrates that plugin to first provide a JavaScript library. So if you need to create an event bus on your JavaScript side, you just have to declare using the resource plugin, the Grace Events resource, and create new Grace events. By default, it takes the current root URL to pass to JavaScript for communication. And then on this nice Grace event object, you can call the on method. And if you need to listen for anything coming from GORM after insert, just specify after insert, and function data will take will be the callback for that event, and the plugin transform it for you any domain into JSON, so you will receive JSON for that data. So this is a backbone JS application, so it's quite simple. Whenever after insert is called, I'm just looking for a similar data in my to-do collection, and I add a new to-do if it doesn't exist. Same approximatively for after delete and after update. But if you can do that, you can think that it will be maybe a security risk if you can listen for anything coming from your server. Well, that's why, coming back to the DSL, you need to enable that before doing any such operation, in fact, because if you don't do that, when you will do a Grace event.on, you will receive a 4 or 3 response code because you're not allowed to listen for that event. And because I don't want to listen for any domain updated on after insert, I'm just tweaking the filter to say I'm just listening for the to-do type. Cool. Now, and the last one, the vertex one. So, same than Spring integration. In fact, vertex replaced the current engine. And well, unlike sending an event in memory, etc., whenever you will use the event method, in that case, you will just under the hood call the vertex event bus. So this is interesting because when you deploy multiple Grails application, automatically using the same mechanism than vertex, they will auto-cluster. And whenever you send an event, they will all receive the event. So that's very interesting for such use case. And plus, you have access to the vertex service bin. If you need to do some vertex stuff in Grails, you can just use the vertex service as well. Moving on, demonstration after just the quick roadmap review. So I need to add before Christmas next year a role queue and a point-to-point eventing, since every event will publish subscribed, so everyone will receive your event whenever you use event, every listener. Sometimes you only want one of them to receive this event, so that can be interesting. The response streaming, in fact, I'm looking more and more to a Kotlin framework called Cool.io, a very interesting one. If you need to have a look to a nice streaming API, have a look at Cool.io. I think I'm going to borrow a lot of concepts from them and try to introduce that in Groovy or directly in Grails. And for events SI, that is okay now. I need to remove that part. And event push, I need to add more filtering. So for the moment, you can just filter on each request if a request have an either a cookie either and a security either, for instance, and you don't want it to receive an event. In the event DSL, there is another attribute called browser filter, which takes a closure. And this is a filter which is called before each push to each client. If you need to prevent a specific client to receive something, you can do that using the browser filter attribute. But I need to pimp that a bit, because using an attribute there is a bit misleading. So, well, we see that in Grails 3, I guess, more support for vertex. And obviously, the answer, at least from Graham and a few team members, is we will be able to put vertex in front of Grails. So, a quick demo. Oh, I don't know what's happening with my IntelliJ, but it just keep crashing, crazy. I'm not the super most corporate guy from SpringSource. I don't use my nice 2 STS. Sorry for that. Sorry, company. I just can't. I'm too used to IntelliJ, and you know, when you're used to shortcuts and things like that, it's hard to switch. Official excuse. Well, right. So, a demo I wanted to introduce. In fact, I don't know if you have seen the Robert Fletcher Angular scaffolding plugin. Quite interesting. You can generate your Angular views for a specific application, a specific domain. I've done that. I've used the same demo, and I've generated an Angular application. Sorry. So it's quite simple. It just, if I show you the domain class, all right. Well, directly on the browser would be fast enough. So it's quite simple. This is generated by the plugin. I've taken my author, which is a simple author with name and email. But what if I need to transform that in a kind of Meteor.js application, I mean, if I have two browsers, and that one will be on the list, and that one will be on the form. So if I add something, I would want to get that directly on my table, like Meteor.js and such frameworks. So basically, the simple thing I have to do with the Grails Angular scaffolding, well, just checking that everything is right. If I go there and I update the name, should be okay. Okay, so everything is cool, everything is updated. If you have a look on the request, just need to update. If you have a look there, it's not very visible, but by default, because my browser is a Chrome browser and I use Tomcat 7 behind 7.040 because it's Grace 2.2, by default it uses WebSocket. If it can't use that, automatically it will fall back to SSE, server-side events. If it doesn't support that, like in Internet Explorer, it will fall back in streaming support. And if it doesn't support that, you're a bit screwed. You're on links. So that's cool because using WebSocket whenever it can is quite a good optimization for the network traffic. Now, having a look at the code, just to so the only thing I need to do, like in the slide, I declare a Grace event object. And since I'm working on the scaffolding plugin from AngularJS, Robber plugin, I need to pimp the scaffolding controller. If you know a bit of scaffolding of AngularJS, you know that AngularJS works with a kind of controller, for instance, show controller, create controller, and the generated stuff from Robber allows you to just update that scaffolding actions. So you've seen that everything is updated on the show view and on the list view. So just showing the show view, the show controller, whenever I go in the show controller, so whenever I click on an action show, I'm registering events on after delete, after update, because I don't care about after insert. In show view, we don't see new inserts. So I listen for after delete and after update, and inside that, I just check that the ID from the domain sent is corresponding to the current root params.id, the current showed object, and if it is, since it's after delete and it has been removed, I just redirect him to the list view. If it's an update, I just apply, well, that's a hack in AngularJS, to apply a change to be instantly notified of a change. You need to use $scope.$apply, and inside that, you can change the current item data model, which is scope item, replaced by the JSON data I've just received. So that's quite simple, in fact, and the list is similar, except that there is after insert. And in the current list, I add the new data, or if it's a remove, I delete the data, or if it's an update, I just update the data online. So the communication part is not that complex. In fact, the inherent complexity there is linked to the fact we use AngularJS, and well, we don't care about notifying the DOM UI. We just change things in JavaScript, which is a big win, at least for me. So that's it. You can do very nasty and interesting stuff with the plugin. Before leaving the microphone, I'm going to just introduce another quick sample. Did I stop the other application? Yeah. Starting this one. No, yes, I have a Wi-Fi. It's just the first start of the morning, so it takes a bit of time. Anyway, I may have it directly on Cloud Foundry. So the other kind of stuff you can do if you like video games like me, you see, there is a bit of lag because I'm using Cloud Foundry, and the lag support I've done behind that is quite simple. But if you need to do a video game or something like that, it may be interesting. There is a lot of lag. I don't like Cloud Foundry for that. I hope one day they will add some WebSocket support, because if you need to do that kind of application, the best bet you have is going to Amazon, unfortunately. Fade to star 80 already used. Right. That's interesting. I guess I'm done normally. That will be simpler. Should start, and I promise I leave there. Any question just before I'm leaving on the topics or on the event?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you know the version of Internet Explorer from you can use this stuff?
Yes, from Internet Explorer, I think I can't bet on 7. I'm not sure about 6, to be honest. But that's a promise from Atmosphere Framework. They support that normally.
From 7.
Yeah. Any other questions? No? Well, I don't know what's going on. Too bad. I'm going to stop there. But this afternoon, if I'm correct, there will be a walk hands-on using the events push as well. So if you need to dig that a bit further, just go on that, just attend that talk. I can't remember the name of the talk. Is Corinne there? No?
It's this afternoon.
Okay. Right. That's it. Right. Whoa. That's most longest run I've never seen. All right. At last. Just to end, a quite interesting thing I like to demo because it has this wow effect. It's using the Chrome support for video. So basically, I'm going to just replicate myself. This one captures this image, send that through the event bus, and this one is just on, like we have seen before, Grace event.on, receive data, in fact, a JPEG or a PNG, can't remember, and just display that as a canvas, an HTML canvas. So you can even do that kind of stuff. Very interesting. That's it. I'm done. Thank you.